throughout this, as you have seen in the chat, you can go to the interpretation button at the bottom, and you will be able to hear the interpretation in Russian or in English as you choose. And if you have any questions, feel free to send them in on the Q&A button at the bottom, and we'll get to those questions either by text or towards the end in the Q&A session. I'm going to start by introducing the Fragomen team. Dan Schwarz is a partner at Fragomen. Mike Israelov is his colleague. They're going to talk about EB-5 and why EB-5 today is really the last great way to access a green card. Immigration into the United States has become much more difficult, as many of you know, but EB-5 still offers a great opportunity. And so I'm going to let them talk about it. They're going to walk you through some slides, and thereafter we'll talk about Pine State. Welcome, everybody.
Hey, thanks, Sebastian. So, yeah, as Sebastian said, my name is Dan Schwarz. I'm a lawyer with Fragomen Immigration Law Firm. Mike, as well as a senior lawyer at our team in Fragomen in New York. So what we're going to talk about today really is EB-5. And we're going to talk about EB-5, as Sebastian said, as a way to get a green card. The process, we're going to go through in good detail. You're going to have a good sense when this is over as to how long it takes, what are the steps that are involved, can your family benefit, basically all the questions, we hope, that are relevant to making a decision as to whether to pursue EB-5. So, Mike, if you want to throw up the deck, we can sort of get into it as to the substance of it, including talking to us, about us, and then getting into it. So, yeah, the opening is just about what we're going to discuss. So again, my name is Dan Schwarz. I'm a partner at the firm, doing this for about 15 years. The focus of our practice is everything U.S. immigration related. So basically any way that we can help folks come to the United States with their families is what we focus on. So whether that's work visas or green cards or citizenship, and part of that, of course, is EB-5. And the focus, of course, of this is going to be the EB-5 program. With me, speaking Russian, is my colleague, Mike Israelov. He's got many years of experience doing the same things that I do, and he speaks Russian, and he's available to assist to the extent that you don't speak English. Mike can help. He speaks both languages. Just a little bit about our firm. So it just gives you a sense of our firm's breadth and coverage. So as you can tell, we're sort of everywhere. We've got about just under 5,000 employees. You can see how it's spread out across the world, throughout Europe, throughout the United States. Basically, wherever folks are going, we are there as well to help our clients navigate getting around the world effectively. So, you know, it's hard to have a conversation about really anything immigration related without talking about COVID. Obviously, we're in the middle of it, or hopefully the end of it, but COVID is still a hot topic. And, you know, there's been a lot of misconceptions about what's going on in the United States from an immigration standpoint. And I think sort of the high level takeaway here is that EB-5 has largely been exempt from the sorts of barriers to immigration in the United States. So effectively, we do have a travel ban in place, and that travel ban affects the Schengen area. It affects Ireland, UK, Brazil, Iran, and China. It does not affect Russia. It does not affect any other countries that are outside of what I just explained. So provided that you've not physically touched one of those areas in the last 14 days preceding your entry to the United States, you are fine. You're good to go. If you have, or if you transit through Schengen area or UK or Ireland or any of those others, then you would be subject to a 14-day waiting period where you've got to go somewhere else in the world to kill the 14 days and then enter the United States, or otherwise get it waived. So it's not about your passport. It's just about where you physically have been in the 14 days preceding an entry to the United States. And importantly, like I said, EB-5 has been exempted from the immigration bans, from pretty much everything, to allow people to continue to get green cards on that basis, which is obviously very important and valuable. So this slide breaks out the different ways to get green cards. And a lot of this stuff you're probably familiar with or have heard before, EB-1, EB-2, EB-3, and then EB-5. Real quick, the value here of EB-5 is you can do it on your own, right? EB-1, 2, and 3 are all based on offers of employment in the United States, and many of them require a labor market test, where the employer is first obligated to identify whether there are qualified U.S. workers that could fill the position. EB-5 does not require any of that stuff. So, you can proceed with this without a job offer. You can proceed with this without speaking English. The requirement simply is the investment in the United States and the resulting job creation, which we'll spend some time on. But it's very unique in this regard. It takes you outside of the normal scheme that's associated with securing a green card, which, like I said, 9 times out of 10 requires an offer of employment in the United States, which is not so easy, right? When unemployment is high, you're not in the United States. It's often hard to get a job offer when you're physically not here. So the last box, I should say, on EB-5 provides a nice summary of what we're going to talk about today. And at its core, really, we've got 2 requirements that must be fulfilled. The investment amount, and as you can read there, it's 1.8 million or 900,000, depending on where the investment is being made. You'll hear from Sebastian later. His project happens to be in the 900,000 threshold. So it's not 1.8, it's 900,000. And he'll explain that and get into the weeds on that with you a little bit more as to what that project looks like. In addition to making the investment of 900,000, you also have to demonstrate the job creation. And I say you, really, I mean Sebastian and his team. So 10 jobs per investor. It's a bit of a unique opportunity for Big River Steel and the project that you'll hear about, because in this instance, the jobs have actually been created already. So it's a bit of a unique model. I'm not going to get too much into that because that's really Big River Steel and Sebastian's thing to focus on. But it's a nice sort of project in the sense that it's not being built, right? It's not a commercial real estate project that's still at the ground level or still in theory. This is a high-grade steel facility that actually exists and is operating. So again, a bit of a unique model. Not too much am I going to get into it. I'm going to leave that largely for Sebastian to discuss, and we'll sort of leave it at that for the time being on the job creation. But again, 900,000 investment amount, and then job creation of at least 10 jobs per investor. And that's pretty, when you think about job creation and you think about the model at Big River Steel, the job creation cushion is actually significant higher than that. So in other words, they're projecting and have created well over 10 jobs per investor, which again provides for a better cushion as well. So again, very, very valuable. On this chart, it's sort of the big question, like, how long does this take? What are we talking about? Months, years? What's the timeline look like? And this chart gives you a good summary of that, and it answers the question sort of, how long do I have to wait? How long does it take for me to get to the United States? Depending on EB-1, EB-2, EB-3, EB-5. And you see in there in this chart, it references each of those categories and then breaks out countries that are relevant in terms of having further backlogs. Individuals who were not born in India, China, or Vietnam, there's no backlog, right? That's that letter C means current. That's what we're circling there on the screen. Current means there's no wait, which is great. It just means it's as long as it takes immigration to process it, but there's no separate backlog like there is if your country of birth were India, China, or Vietnam for EB-5. So although the process does take a while, right? Just processing times in general take about 2 to 3 years total from start to finish. That's a good estimate. It's not something that takes 5 to 10 years, right? It's not something that takes beyond that for people country of birth. China, as an example, can take, in theory, much longer. So this can change, and it may change as demand for EB-5 increases, and the expectation is that it ultimately will. So I think the takeaway of this slide is, one, it's a good thing. There is no backlog currently. But 2, it's to think, well, how long is that going to be the case? And that's an unknown. And for that reason, if you've decided in your head, all right, I want a green card. One way or another, I want to get my family to the United States. And after this conversation and discussion, and maybe some more thought, you decide, well, I think EB-5 is the way to go. there's nothing to wait for. Like the investment amounts aren't going to go down. Things aren't going to change in that respect. Processing times aren't going to get better, presumably. So I think the takeaway is, if you're interested, if you've decided, it makes sense to proceed now. There's no gain that you're getting by waiting to the United States, waiting to come to the United States, particularly because the COVID bans and those different things that I talked about are EB-5 is exempt from it. So you're not even caught up in all of that. You're under a separate path, which is a nice thing. So other than speed, right, which is value to me, why invest $900,000 to get a green card for your family? Seems like a lot of money. You've heard about H-1Bs, other green card processes. Like, why do this? Why $900,000 to put at risk for purposes of getting a green card when aren't there other ways? And there are other ways. I'll say that the other ways are not, you don't control them, right? The other ways are controlled by an employer who sponsors the work visa for you. There's nothing wrong with that, right? That's just a different approach to solving the same issue, which is getting a green card. So I think from that standpoint, we've all heard about H-1Bs and the request for evidence and the challenges that the government's putting up to securing those. That continues to be an issue. The related piece to it is, EB-2 or EB-3, great, that's a good process, but it requires a labor market test, right? It requires an employer who's got a real job offer, like one that you intend to fill and they intend for you to fill, that you meet the requirements for. So those are things that are, significantly different from EB-5. EB-5 removes all of that and allows you to control it. So to me, that's value in the sense that you're deciding when you want to do it. You're deciding what you want to invest in. Right? You're making these decisions for yourself and your family, not relying on an employer who's going to kind of gather you and put you through the process, which again, there's nothing wrong with that approach. It's just that EB-5 presents an opportunity that's separate and apart from that and separates because of that. So, it's worth just reflecting on a little bit of, look, there are multiple ways to get to the United States. There's multiple ways to get a green card. And is this the right one? So, it's something to reflect on and think about. And I think when you walk away today, the goal is that you've got a good sense on what EB-5 is and a good sense on whether it's something that you want to do. So, I guess let's get into it. What's required. So we've talked about it a few times. The investment must be made. So the $900,000 must be invested, which means it must be put into escrow, right? So actually invested in the United States. And the escrow account is the one held by Pine State and Big River Steel. So the $900,000 invested before we file the petition with immigration. Again, when we file, we're demonstrating that there were at least 10 jobs per investor. So again, you're not really proving that. You're not required to go to Big River Steel and say, give me the summary of the job so I can understand it. You can, but effectively that's an argument that we take and work with Big River Steel on to submit it to immigration as part of the petition filing. So this is a good thing. It doesn't mean that you have to go out and hire people, right? That's what you're relying on them for. That's why you're investing in their project, because they meet the threshold. You don't have to go out and do it. And that's why Big River Steel can assist, and why they'll get into the specifics on that. I just want to clarify one thing. I mean, I guess I've said Big River Steel a few times now. We don't work for them, and they don't work for us. So, like, if you were to proceed with this and wanted to hire a lawyer, we could be your lawyers directly. We're not their lawyers. They don't pay us. We don't pay them. There's no sort of financial relationship there. I mean, we've worked together for years. I've actually been to Arkansas. I've seen the project. I've seen the steel mill. But again, they don't pay me. I don't pay them. There's none of that sort of relationship. This is all just for you. Like, you would be our client if you decided to proceed. So we document all this stuff, right? The job creation, the investment. We have to demonstrate where the money came from, like how you got it to invest, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But then we file it with immigration. And immigration eventually will either approve it, right, or deny it. And we have great success rate with this, and the denial rate for cases with our firm is extremely, extremely low. And the same goes for Pine State. The point being, if we do our due diligence, right, if we look at your background and say, okay, where did this money come from? Can we document it? There's not really a reason why the application should ultimately be approved, as long as we can prove the things that we're talking about right now. So just keep that in mind from a success rate standpoint. It is quite high. So we get all this stuff, we file it, immigration will ultimately approve it, we expect. And then once it's approved, you'll get a conditional green card. And a conditional green card is a card that's valid for 2 years. And that means everybody can move to the United States, you, your spouse, your kids, if they're under 21, all for the $900,000 investment, can move to the United States and start living. In the period that's just before the 2 years is up, we file another set of paperwork to get the full unconditional green card, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But just again, high level, we get this thing approved. You don't have to go live anywhere in particular in the United States. You don't have to go to Arkansas. You don't have to live or work for Big River Steel. You could work and live in New York, San Francisco, you name it, and have gotten the green card based off an investment in Arkansas or anywhere else for that matter, as an example. So again, the 900,000 is a unique opportunity. Usually it's 1.8 million is the default. There's few projects that have this 900,000 threshold, and Pine State is among those that have been around successfully working in this area. A lot of EB-5 projects up to this point were in cities. If you're familiar with New York, there's projects all over New York that are city-based, which now no longer qualify for 900 or what used to be 500, and are now all in at the 1.8 number, which is obviously significantly higher than what you'd like. So 900,000, once you have the green card, it's good for 2 years. You should expect to live in the United States once you have a green card. So, we could talk with you about that, and is there flexibility? Like, can you wait to come? Do you have to come right away? There is strategy that can go into that to sort of push that date back from when you actually start living in the States. But remember, the purpose of getting a green card is to live here. So, and that's what the government expects when you have one, is that the U.S. will ultimately, right, we could be creative and strategic in how we accomplish it, but ultimately the purpose is to live in the States. So I guess that's probably obvious, but just keep that in mind. And if you got to live outside for a while, there's stuff that we can do to facilitate that short term so that you don't have to live in the U.S. immediately. But it is important to know that ultimately the U.S. would be your home by definition, because that's what a green card is and what it requires. Aside from living in the United States and working in the United States, getting a green card also opens some other doors, such as visa-free travel to lots of other countries once we're all traveling again, hopefully soon. And like I said earlier, you, spouse, and kids all get the green card for the single investment amount. So everyone's in at that 900 level. You can live, work, retire. Green card gives you ultimate flexibility to do really whatever you want. So you could live, you can start your own business. You could not. You could work for whoever you'd like. You could decide, you know what, I'm done. I've had a great career. I don't need to work, which is also an opportunity. So no need to work in the United States if you don't want to. Based off a green card. Also unusual with EB-1, EB-2, EB-3, you're working for that employer. That's the basis that you got the green card, is to facilitate that employment. So this is a good slide. I think it helps break out in a little bit more detail what we've all just been talking about by way of the process. So step one, right? Choose where you want to invest. 900,000, 1.8 million, presumably we're interested in the 900 as opposed to 1.8. And think about the projects that are available and where you want to invest. We know Pine State a long time. Like I said before, we don't pay them, they don't pay us, but we know projects, right? And we know projects that sort of tick the criteria for purposes of EB-5. And part of our firm's process involves doing due diligence on projects to say, okay, can we file cases with this organization? Do we feel comfortable? And of course, I'm here because we've done that, and Pine State is one of those that ticks all those boxes and meets the requirements. So whatever, step one is choose. Do you want to do this, and where do you want to invest? Step two is, guess what? Do it. Right. So once you decide where you want to invest and that you want to come to the United States, once those threshold decisions are made, we do the 526 petition. So that means you make the investment, and we work with you very, very closely to document the source of funds. So that means, where did the dough come from, right? Look at, where did the money originate? Did it come from savings? Did it come from the sale of property? Did it come from a gift, right? And if it came from a gift, how did that person get it? Who gifted it to you? So we look at all of that stuff and work very closely with you to make sure that the source of funds is airtight, and something that the government will understand and appreciate and not question whether the money came from lawful sources. So that's all step two, that the second box there. Step three, after the 526 is filed and approved, we then coordinate with the U.S. consulate back in your home country. So whether that's Russia or wherever in the world, we work closely with all the different consulates, American consulates around the world, to facilitate securing that immigrant visa in your passport. And that thing is clutch, because that's what facilitates you entering the United States, right? That thing in your passport is the ability to enter. So that's what the coordination with the U.S. consulate is. If you happen to be in the U.S. already, you can also file something so you don't have to leave and come back. So we could get you the green card locally in the U.S., depending on what your status is at the time the 526 is approved. So, keep that in mind. We'll help strategize and cross that bridge for you and your family when we get to that point. So again, we've talked about this a little bit already, but once that's approved at the U.S. consulate or adjustment of status in the States, you get the green card that's good for 2 years. The investment needs to stay at risk during that 2-year period. And then, during that period, and then once, you're in the, what would it be, 90 days before that expires, the 2-year card, the application can then turn into something called the 829. And you see that in that light blue square in the bottom middle. And the 829 is the petition that we file saying, okay, government, we've waited the requisite period of time. It's been about 2 years since I got the green card. We're in the 90 days that precede it. I'm now filing this to get rid of this condition on my green card and get unconditional status. I want indefinite green card status, okay? So that's a process that's, again, we drive it heavily. We'll need some info from you, but really we work with the regional center and with, in this case, Big River Steel and Pine State to document the job creation. That's the big thing that we're talking about when we file the 829, which is, did the jobs get created? And again, this is not a burden on you. You're not running around trying to hire folks. That's what you're engaging and investing in Pine State and Big River Steel for. So they provide the evidence, we review it, we work with them and you to file the 829 petition. And then once that's filed and ultimately approved, you get the full unconditional green card. Once you have that, of course, the investment amount can come back to you. So that the 900,000 amount, of course, was an investment, not a gift to Pine State. And I think Sebastian will talk about the return on that and the duration of it, like when to expect that to come back to you. Typically, it's around 7 years from when you invested. So this slide, I really like this one because it goes start to finish, right? It's make the decision. Do you want to do this? If so, here's what you do next. And again, it's very high level. There's a lot in those things that we would work with you on, but I think it's a nice overview of the process and sort of each of the 6 steps, from decision to permanent residence. And permanent meaning when the conditions are lifted on your status. The 829 petition takes a while, but that's okay, right? Because at that point you're sort of you're in, as they say. So for this next slide, we're looking at the timeline. So the timeline for EB-5 it's not short, don't get me wrong, but it's also not that long. I mean, the green cards based upon employment take around the same time, and it's a significant fact to reflect on, because what are you gaining by doing that, right? You lose control. It's based off an offer of employment that you have to maintain and intend to fill. So point being, I think, again, just a comparison with non-EB-5 versus EB-5, EB-5 continues to sort of stand alone in terms of its control and its ability to get you the green card without relying on the employer. So on the timeline, it's self-explanatory, I think, but I'll just bang through it real quick. The preparation and filing of the 526 takes about a month or two to get there, to get to the place of filing it. The reason for that duration of time is, well, you got to make the investment, right? You have to sign all the subscription documents. You have to become a limited partner to then make the investment with the regional center. We have a ton of work. to do with you in terms of the source of funds. If it's easy, great, but oftentimes there's a couple of different sources that we've got to work through, so that takes a little bit of time. But once the 526 is filed, you see the timeline there, 18 to 36 months, stinks, kind of long, but we're not seeing it really take that long. We are seeing it sort of right hanging around before the 2-year mark. So again, not great, but the nice thing is once that 526 gets approved, you'll see the timeline kind of accelerates. So it's a lot of sitting around and waiting for that big chunk of time. But once the 526 does get approved, the timing sort of takes off. So what is that specifically? What are we talking about? Well, once the 526 gets approved, the file gets transferred, if you're not in the States, to the U.S. consulate outside. U.S. consulate outside will take about 6 to 8 months all in from when you get the 526 approved to when you visit the U.S. consulate to then get your immigrant visa in your passport to use that to enter the States, right? That's effectively a green card in your passport that facilitates the entry. So 6 to 8 months for that to happen. And then once you're here, you're a permanent resident. You've got about 2 years of that to enjoy. You can travel in and out. It's a multiple entry document. Very straightforward. But remember, at the 1 year, 9 month stage, so 3 months before you hit the 2 years, we can file that 829 petition to get the conditions lifted on your permanent residence. That thing, like I said before, it takes a while. 18 to 29 months is kind of long, but you don't really care that much about how long it takes. Obviously, we want to get it over with, but the timeline doesn't affect you because you're still a permanent resident. You get a receipt that extends your status, so it's not like you're going to run out of permanent residence because the 829 takes too long. So, you know, we'd like it to be done fast because fast is better. But the fact that it takes a while doesn't really affect you. You can still, like I said, travel in and out. You've got the receipt that extends your status. It allows you to live in the United States, work, do all the same stuff. So I think, you know, from that standpoint, there's again value in understanding the distinction between the 829 and the 526. So the 526 is early, right? For that, you're proving I made the investment and the money came lawfully. And here's some other stuff about the business plan, about how the jobs are going to be created or already have been created. And then the 829 is proving that the jobs have been created. So again, it's a little bit unusual in this situation because for this project, jobs have already actually been created. And you might be saying, well, hey, Dan, that makes no sense. How have the jobs been created if they don't have my money yet? How can I even, that makes no sense. Well, it does in the sense that it's a unique model. Well, not that unique in EB-5, but where the money is actually being used to repay certain funds. So repay a bridge loan that facilitated everything that happened as a result of it. So you're not relying on waiting for your money, your 900,000, and then go hire people, right? That is a common process as well, but that's not this. This jobs have been created. The money's being used to pay back a loan, which is perfectly permissible. And you know, it's funny, in the beginning of EB-5, it was kind of unclear of the permissibility of that. It is now quite clear that process can work just fine. So, and then 829, like I was saying, it's merely that. It's all about the job creation. So once we file that thing, it's kind of curious that it takes so long. Like, why 18 to 29 months when it's not that complicated? It's a resource thing. You know, the government doesn't have a ton of folks adjudicating them. They want the people who do adjudicate them to be well qualified. So they don't have a ton of folks who do it, and therefore, as you might imagine, it can result in a bit of a longer process because of that. So here, really quick, I mean, what we're summarizing effectively, is sort of the source of funds is the most critical piece to it in my mind. So for that, what we're talking about really is tracing the origin of the funds. So we look back 5 years of tax returns. We look at where did the money come from, right? So did it come from a job? Did it come from a bonus? Where do you want to isolate the 900,000? You don't have to show all of your wealth. The government's not interested in learning about everything. They are interested, though, in learning about where did the 900 come from. So let's just say, you know, we're tracing it back and then we're showing the path. If the money touches other money, does that mean we can't use it? No, we certainly can. But we have to be cautious in terms of being ready to explain, well, where did that money come from? So if you put 900,000 into an account that had 900,000 already, and then you're taking out the 900, just tell us in theory where everything came from, but document just the specific 900 that you're actually putting into the project. So, some of the common source of funds, I said them before, a gift. Let's say it's a gift from a parent. That's great. That's fine. Legal, provided that taxes were paid if taxes were due. But then we're not done, unfortunately. The government's not saying, all right, well, look, if it's a gift, then we don't care where that person got the money from. They do. We do have to document, therefore, where the person who gifted it got the money. So we don't escape it, but it's an acceptable source of funds. The other is accumulation of earnings. So working over time, right? You've saved money. Now you have an account that has the 900,000 in it, and you want to use that. Totally permissible, totally fine. We have to submit, again, evidence that you actually earned that money. So whether that's annual tax documents, a job letter, other evidence that correlates to where that money come from. Earnings from business, also very popular. Sale of stock, sale of property. Those are all very common ways to go about documenting the source of the funds. And again, we'll work with you. We're not going to say, hey, send us proof of the source of funds. Thanks. We work with you. We sit with you. We identify, okay, what makes sense? Tell us about your situation. Tell us about where money sits for you. Where do you spend from? Where have you put your savings, right? Those sorts of questions. We work with you on to identify, okay, well, look, we could use this. We could use that. Here's the one that we think makes the most sense because it's the simplest approach to dealing with it. So again, I think my message here is just that no one's asking you to be on your own. You're going to have support from, if you use us, our firm, or whatever lawyer you end up using. And it's critical that you have a trust relationship with that person, because without disclosing to them and them feeling comfortable talking to you, this is going to be a challenging process. The process, no doubt, has some intrusiveness to it. It's about your wealth, right? It's where'd your money come from? And usually what we get is an initial feedback of, well, Dan, that's really easy. Don't worry about it. Super easy. I got it. Let's go. But then when we start to look at the accounts, we realize there's a bit more to it, right? There's a bit more complexity. Maybe there's multiple accounts. Maybe, your earnings went into account A and then went into account B and then went into account C, and then we're commingled with some other money and then ultimately used for the investment. That's all okay. There's nothing wrong with that. We have to trace it. So we need bank accounts for each, showing the money moving and ultimately showing it going to the regional center for investment. So, that's essentially very high level what we're talking about when we talk about source of funds. And I just want to reiterate, it's one investment for the family, right? So you're not talking about multiple investments for each family member. So it's you, spouse, and kids under 21 can all benefit. Just generally one point on that, I guess I may not have mentioned it. I said kids under 21. So what happens if you have a child who's approaching 21 or who is 21? Depending on the time, we might say, don't worry about it, you're fine. There's sufficient time for him to be included or her to be included in your application. But there might be instances where it's very close, like the child will turn 21 in a month. And there's no way that that's going to progress fast enough to protect that child. Or is already over 21 and you want him or her to be able to come to the United States with you. Usually the answer to that is multiple investments. So then you're looking at an investment for the child and an investment for the rest of the family. Let's say it's you, spouse, and the children who are like 10 or whatever, or 15 or well under 21. And then the child who's over 21 would have his or her own investment to be able to get the green card. So again, otherwise, spouse, kids under 21 can all benefit together, which is pretty great. The other thing that we should mention, again, this is really more Sebastian, I guess, but to talk about the return on the investment. When does that come? So that's a topic that he'll cover, but it is relevant to that summary of the process. So here we're kind of looking ahead and back in the recent history about recent regulatory and legal changes. So it's unlikely that Congress is not going to extend it again. It's up in like a month or a month and a half. We fully expect, everyone does, that it's going to get extended. You never know till you know. So again, it's one of those things where if you've decided that this is what you want to do, it might make sense to get it in sooner rather than later. But again, we have every expectation that the program will be extended. Recently, of course, we have the changes. I'm not going to beat them to death, but the old investment amount was $1 million, and then it went to 1.8. The old investment for projects that are in high unemployment areas or rural areas, such as Big River Steel, was traditionally 500. Now it's 900. So that is what it is. That changed about 9 months ago. It switched over to those higher investment amounts. The good news here is that new policy is how they count cases. So what they're doing is, like I talked before about China and India being backlogged, right? And years potentially backlogged. India not that terrible, but China is. So the government recently said, well, what are we doing? Why are we adjudicating these 526 petitions when the person's waiting years anyway? Like, let's slow down on that and speed up on other countries who can get the green card imminently. So that's good. I mean, that's basically what's happened. So the new policy is supposed to attempt to push through cases from countries such as Russia, such as Eastern Europe, a little bit faster, because what's the value in putting them behind the China cases when you're just going to jump them anyway, right? Because China and Vietnam and India have to continue to wait. I'm using China because that backlog is more significant than the other countries. But that's a valuable thing. The idea here again is identifying for you, what does the timeline look like, and how do these changes affect you? So obviously the investment amount, right, from 500 to 900 affects you. It's higher. The revision of how they designate what's considered targeted employment area or rural, that's significant because Sebastian and Big River Steel, that's already identified as that. So the change is not something that has affected that regional center. For others, it has. Projects that typically in the past qualified for 500, a lot of them have now gone to the 1.8, which is a huge jump, not just 5 to 9, but 5 to 1.8 if they're located in a city and therefore not exempt for the lower 900 amount. So really important. The timelines are, not many things do we have great optimism about with immigration lately. But these changes are all positive, and the audience that we're talking to for not India, China, Vietnam is significant, and it's an added plus for you in terms of thinking about, should I do this? I think the answer is, well, look, first threshold, do you want to come to the U.S.? And if so, why? Do you plan to live here? That stuff. That stuff is yes. This is a nice project. It's a nice opportunity. It's a nice program for you to be able to enter the United States and to work or not, retire, do whatever you like in the States. So with that, I think we should pass it back to presenter, to Sebastian Stubbe. We thank you for your time. Hope it was helpful. And we're going to hang out so we can answer questions afterwards as well. But with that, I'm going to stop talking and pass it back to Sebastian.
Great. Thank you, Dan. I am going to, so Pavel, if you could spotlight me, and then we'll switch to talking a little bit about Pine State and Big River. So before I start talking about our company and about our project, let me say a few words about myself, because they're quite relevant, I think, to the way a lot of you are thinking about EB-5. So I may sound American, but I'm actually European, and I'm a green card holder. So I'm potentially the only CEO in the EB-5 industry that has a green card. I've had the green card for about 25 years, and I came to the United States the same way a lot of your families are thinking about this. So I came as a student. My parents sent me to the United States for college on an F1 visa, and then about halfway through college, my father was able to procure the green card for the family, and I was still under 21, so I was very, very fortunate. I got the green card, and so at that point, I was able to benefit I got to experience a lot of the benefits of the green card, including financial aid for college, scholarships I suddenly qualified for, which I didn't as an F1 student. I was able to, get an internship, and then, of course, when I graduated, even more importantly, I was able to apply for jobs as an American resident. So I was really viewed as an American, meaning companies, and I was heading to Wall Street, Investment banks didn't have to sponsor me. They didn't have to worry about getting me a work permit because I was already qualified. That makes a huge difference when you're looking for a job. So a lot of families today who are thinking about doing this for their kids, it's not just that first step, and it is easier to get into school. It is easier to get access to financial aid, etc. But even more importantly, perhaps it's what happens after you graduate. The fact that you might have done a great job in school, you might have attracted some nice job offers, but you can't actually take them because there are no work permits available. That's a very challenging situation. So a lot of our investors are thinking about it from that perspective. The rest of my family benefited in a whole bunch of ways as well. The rest of my siblings, some of them went to public school. Many of them were also able to get jobs and in the United States, move around, not be tied to one state or one city. It's a very, very flexible tool, and so I highly recommend it. The reason I bring this up is that investors often will reach out and talk to me about their specific family situation. I'm happy to talk to people, so please feel free to reach out and ask questions about my experience. So I'm going to switch to talking about our actual company and our project. Okay. Let's see if we can, 1 second here. Screen sharing. Okay. Here we go. Excuse me for a second. Okay. So before I get started about the Big River Steel project, which Dan mentioned a number of times, that is our current project, I'm going to talk a little bit about our own company. So I'm the CEO of Pine State Regional Center. Obviously, on behalf of our whole team, I welcome your interest in both our regional center and our EB-5 project. I'm going to walk you through what I hope will be an informative summary, and then afterwards, as we said before, we'll gladly take some questions. Before we get started, I just want to remind you that the presentation is only informational and not an offer to sell securities. Our lawyers want us to recommend that you consult your own advisors before you make any investment decisions, and that's obviously a good idea. On this first page here, I would draw your attention to the fact that, and Dan mentioned this a number of times, our current project that we are talking about is a rural project. This means it's in a so-called rural targeted employment area. That does have a huge advantage in terms of the pricing and the idea that a targeted employment area is based on the rural geography means it cannot change. Other regional centers are talking about projects that are unemployment based. That's a little bit more challenging because unemployment currently in the United States is moving all over the place, and the statistics can make it a little bit difficult to confirm that you are indeed a targeted employment area, but that's not something you have to worry about with Big River. Big River is confirmed to be geographically rural, and so we are at the lower price, and our investors benefit from that as well as any potential legislative changes. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about what you should be thinking about when you're looking at EB-5. Safety is really, in our view, the number one concern. There are really four main risks to focus on. First, is the regional center a good partner for you with your best interests in mind? The regional center is going to be your partner through the entire process. So you want to make sure that it's someone that you feel comfortable with, someone that is positioned to be there for the long run, to have the right compliance approach, to have a great track record, and so forth. Secondly, does the EB-5 project provide you with a solid path to get the green card? Thirdly, as Dan talked a lot about, are you confident that the project will create enough jobs so that the conditions on your green card can be removed? And then finally, is the project likely to have sufficient capital to repay you your investment at the end of the investment period? Our regional center and our Big River Steel Phase 2 project are uniquely positioned to help address each of these 4 safety risks. So first of all, we're an independent regional center. What that means is that we're not affiliated or owned by the developers of this project. This avoids any conflict of interest, and our fiduciary obligation is just to you, the investor. And furthermore, we work very closely with the government to ensure a safe and secure execution of this project. Secondly, Big River Steel, as I mentioned, is in a rural targeted employment area. We have done a phase 1 of this project, which I'll talk a little bit about. And you'll see we've had almost 50 approvals at this point, and so it's a project that the USCIS is familiar with and very comfortable with. Thirdly, our project, as Dan mentioned, we did use this so-called bridge equity structure, which is a huge advantage for EB-5 investors because it means that the project was able to start construction immediately last summer. And at this point, all the jobs have already been created. So it mitigates both the financing risk and the completion risk. And as of today, also all the job risk aspects. And then finally, how do I know I get my money back? How do I get comfortable? Well, the Big River Steel project is already fully operational. That's very unique in the EB-5 industry. So because you're looking at a phase 2, this is a project that completed its phase 1, was able to start operations, is very profitable, creating cash flow continuously. And we'll talk a little bit about how COVID has affected this. Big River Steel has been very nicely insulated from COVID, continues to operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I'll talk a little bit more about this, but in terms of safety, again, you have an independent regional center with a long track record. You have a premier project that is already in phase 1, gotten a lot of approvals. It is a project that has no financing risk, no completion risk, and no job risk. And because it's already profitable and the developers behind it are a premier list of developers, it's a very safe project as it relates to getting your money back as well. Before we go into each of these 4 areas in some more detail, we're going to show you a brief video. I think that will give you some context, and then we'll dive a little bit deeper into the actual aspects of the project. I'm going to ask Pavel to switch to the video.
On the heels of its successful Phase 1 offering, Pine State Regional about Phase 2 of the successful Big River Steel project, a premier project in a rural targeted employment area. Pine State Regional Center is part of an economic development corporation founded by Winthrop Rockefeller in the 1950s, with a 60-year track record of success and integrity, a close working relationship with state and federal government, and a heavy emphasis on risk management. Pine State is an independent regional center and completely aligned with our investors. In July 2019, Pine State successfully finished the EB-5 raise for Phase 1 of the Big River Steel project. Big River Steel is one of the world's most advanced, high-grade steel recycling plants and answers the call of President Trump and the U.S. government to bring back manufacturing industry jobs to the heartland of the United States. Various members of Congress, including former House Judiciary Chairman Bob Goodlatte, have called it the poster project of what EB-5 was meant to be. Phase 1 of this EB-5 project successfully raised $60 million of EB-5 financing, and Big River Steel has already promoted economic growth, improved regional productivity, and created over 10,000 jobs, more than 8 times the jobs needed. Today, Big River Steel is one of the most profitable EB-5 projects ever, with over $1.3 billion in sales and $260 million in EBITDA profit in the first year of full operations. Now, Big River Steel is starting an $870 million expansion to double its capacity and create thousands of more jobs. Pine State's BRS Phase 2 is a unique opportunity for EB-5 investors. Our investors will have the benefit of evaluating an expansion project of a company that is already extremely profitable. Using a bridge equity structure, Phase 2 is already fully financed. Big River Steel has an unusually high caliber of equity investors, including Koch Industries, one of the largest private industrial companies in the world, Texas Pacific Group, one of the top private equity groups in the world, and the Arkansas Teachers Retirement System, the largest pension fund in Arkansas. Phase 2 will have a large job cushion, mitigating the risk for a successful I-829 process. And finally, the project is located in a true rural targeted employment area and will continue to benefit from a lower investment price level. On behalf of Pine State Regional Center, we welcome your interest and look forward to working with you.
Great. Thank you. And Pavel, I'm going to take over the share screen, and we'll go back to the Here we go. Okay. So I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about Pine State, about our regional center. So we're unique in a number of ways. We're actually one of the oldest organizations in the industry. We've been around since the 1950s. In fact, we were started by the Rockefeller family. And we're actually effectively a nonprofit. We're what's called an economic development corporation. And as such, our entire focus is on creating jobs in economic activities since the 1950s. And moreover, our firm has a close working relationship with the government. And it was actually originally the governor of the state of Arkansas who asked us to establish a regional center for Arkansas and the surrounding states. We place a heavy emphasis on risk control, and our management team has a very long track record of safe and successful economic development. We invest billions of dollars in a variety of job-creating programs, government-related programs such as new market tax credits, small business lending, venture capital, business plan competitions, and of course, EB-5. A meaningful differentiator between Pine State and many other regional centers is that we are, as I mentioned earlier, an independent regional center. This means we're not affiliated or owned by any developer, and that kind of removes the possibility of conflicts of interest, because obviously a developer is focused on maximizing their profit, whereas a regional center should be there to protect the EB-5 investor, make sure your money comes back, and so having those be separate is a safer approach. We do not share any economic ownership in Big River Steel. We don't benefit if they make more money or less money. We are entirely focused on the obligation to the EB-5 investor. Also, unlike many regional centers, because we are a so-called economic development corporation, we're regulated and audited by a whole bunch of both state and federal agencies. So most regional centers are not required to be audited. Some of them will self-audit, but they're not required to do so. We are required to do so. So there's a lot of oversight. It's very easy to do due diligence on Pine State. We have there's a lot of public information available. And again, we've been around for almost 70 years. So the track record is long and there's a lot to look at. Phase 1. So let me spend a few minutes talking about Phase 1. We closed Phase 1 in July of 2019, and it was really one of the most successful EB-5 projects ever. The facility is today the world's most advanced high-grade steel producer. We work closely with the state and the federal government And members of Congress have called it the poster project of what EB-5 was meant to be. It created jobs in a very poor area, and it turned into a huge success. We used the same bridge equity structure in phase 1 as we're using now in phase 2. And because of that, the project was able to begin construction immediately, finish ahead of schedule, and begin profitable operations right out of the gate. As I mentioned, it is profitable. It was immediately profitable. This was one of the most profitable EB-5 projects ever. It did almost $250 million of EBITDA cash flow in the first year of operations alone, on over $1 billion of sales. Today, it continues to do around $90 to $100 million worth of sales every month, which is obviously an enormous operation. Equally importantly, this is a project that created way more jobs than we needed in phase 1. In fact, it created almost 8 times, almost 800% the necessary jobs. Ultimately, really a great example of the benefit of the rural TEA and the use of bridge equity. So now, the project is launching, or has launched, an expansion. So because the BRS phase 1 was so successful, they actually moved up the plans for an expansion by about a year, and launched the doubling of the size of this plant last July, and we are again raising EB-5 capital for that. So the expansion is almost $900 million. We are raising about $100 million for that expansion in EB-5. As I mentioned, the project is a carbon copy of phase 1. It's the same company, it's the same management team, it's the same ownership, same regional center, and the same bridge equity structure. The project is located in, as I mentioned, in what's called a true rural targeted employment area. Continues to benefit from the lower investment price, and without having to worry about shifting unemployment trends, which are expected to affect many TEAs. There may also be a number of reforms taking place, all of which an EB-5 investor in a rural area would benefit from. The project has received an unusual amount of government support for an EB-5 project. Most EB-5 projects are real estate or hospitality. Those are things that the government doesn't get very involved in. But in this particular case, because the U.S. has been very keen on bringing manufacturing jobs back to the United States, this was a project that had a lot of support, both in terms of grants, in terms of loans, in terms of support in the legislature, in terms of infrastructure improvements, both from the city, the state, and the federal government. And the state of Arkansas designated the project the first super project for the state. Worth noting, as you can see here on this slide, is that former President Bill Clinton, who was also the former governor of the state of Arkansas, was very involved in attracting this project, which was choosing between a number of states. They ultimately chose the state of Arkansas. For an EB-5 investor, all of this means that there are many stakeholders that are really focused on making sure that this is a huge success. And, including all the way up to the current administration. President Trump actually talks a lot about Big River in his stump speeches as an example of the fact that the U.S. can again be a leader in manufacturing. So there are a number of clips of him that we can share with you where he talks about Big River. So it's attractive for an EB-5 investor because a lot of eyeballs from senior government officials are on this project, making sure that it goes well. In fact, here you can see, but not here, but this is Donald Trump talking about Big River Steel. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about this bridge equity. So Dan mentioned it a number of times. Your biggest stress in the EB-5 investment is whether or not enough jobs will be there at the end so that you don't only get the green card, but you actually get to keep that green card. By using bridge equity, which basically means that the owners of the project are able to, or were willing to come out of pocket, put up an additional $100 million as a bridge up front. And then the EB-5 investor that invests later, i.e. now or a month from now or 2 months from now, effectively replaces that capital. That money is used to pay back that bridge. What that means is that the EB-5 investor, even if they invest today, they get credit as if they invested on the first day of the financing in 2019. And with that comes also the credit for the jobs. Every job created since the summer of 2019 gets credited to an EB-5 investor today. So what that means is that, you know, there's no financing risk, and especially at a time during this pandemic when it's difficult to get financing for projects, where it's unclear whether or not a project that started raising capital, will they finish raising capital? This is a project that you don't have to worry about, because even if Pine State does not raise the full $100 million, the financing for this project is already complete. That's an enormous advantage. There's no worry about the financing. The project continues to work in construction. There's been no slowdowns. We'll talk a bit more about the pandemic itself and its impact on Big River in a minute. But so far, there's been no slowdowns. The project is ahead of schedule, below budget. And very importantly, as of February, and so February 7 months ago, this is a project that has created all the jobs already. So there's no more jobs that need to be created. It is continuing to create more jobs, but not needed for the EB-5 investor. You can already check that box. And so really some of the biggest risks have been removed: financing risk, completion risk, job risk. And so that is a very large advantage for EB-5 investors. That leaves really the last concern is, how do I know I'm going to get my money back? And even here, there are a lot of unique advantages for an EB-5 investor. The most obvious one being it's already a profitable business. That's very unusual for EB-5 investors. Because Big River in phase 1 was able to start operations, it is a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week operation, and is continuing to generate cash flow on an ongoing basis. Another factor that should give investors a lot of comfort is the unusually high caliber of investors. So as you see on here, the picture is of the Koch brothers. Koch Industries is the world's largest private industrial company, known to be a very shrewd, conservative, and sophisticated group. They were originally the largest investor in the Big River Steel project. Behind them are groups such as Texas Pacific Group, one of the top private equity groups in the world, and Arkansas Teachers Retirement System. That's one of the largest pension plans in the state of Arkansas. All of these are very conservative and sophisticated groups. Warren Buffett's, one of Warren Buffett's main holding companies, BNSF, is also a meaningful participant. And, excuse me. And so what you have with that is really, you know, a group of investors that sit behind you that should give you a lot of comfort. They have, between the two phases, the equity group has put in about $1 billion. So out of the $2.5 billion of total capitalization, almost $1 billion of it is equity. That's very high for an EB-5 project. Often you see the developers not putting in so much of their own money, relying heavily on construction loans and bank loans in EB-5, but here the owners have actually put in a lot of their own capital. And because they are common equity holders and preferred equity holders, they sit behind the EB-5 investor. So if the EB-5 investor doesn't get repaid, they lose their investment. And so it is a very comfortable place to sit, knowing that this sophisticated group feels comfortable sitting behind you. They've obviously all done a lot of due diligence, and there's a lot of oversight. More recently, quick side note, United States Steel, one of the oldest steel companies in the world, has taken a large minority stake in Big River. From the perspective of an EB-5 investor, that just further confirms or affirms the health of this company and the attractiveness of this company. Final couple of points here. I'm just going to, basically some of these are a little bit newer. These visuals are a little bit newer than in the video, so it's worth seeing here. This is not only a very advanced steel plant, but it's also a very green steel plant. In fact, it's the most environmentally friendly steel plant in the world, and the first and still only steel plant that has ever gotten a LEED designation for environmental sustainability. This is a very powerful selling tool as it helps Big River Steel's OEM customers meet their own sustainability targets. Furthermore, I would draw your attention to this slide, which basically highlights the fact that this is the most productive steel plant in North America as measured by cash flow per employee. This is particularly beneficial at a time when other competitors are struggling during the pandemic with bloated payrolls, inefficient operating structures, making Big River very nimble and able to weather any market downturn. And then finally, here also you can see that it's in addition to that productive employee structure, Big River also benefits from very energy efficient structure. Currently, Big River has the second highest operating margins in North America, but after phase 2 is completed, the expectation is that it will actually be number 1. Finally, I would say that for an EB-5 investor, one advantage is that it's very easy to do due diligence on Big River. A lot of media from all over the world have done pieces on Big River. The technology is extremely unique and advanced, and so this is something that both media outlets in the United States and outside of the United States have picked up. Makes life easier for you as you perform due diligence along with your lawyers. And then finally, unfortunately, what I was about to say is that we would welcome you for a visit. It's a little bit more difficult during the days of the pandemic, but we're always accepting visitors, and we're always happy to have people come. And so, if you are in the United States and you're close to Arkansas, we're happy to have you visit. And for the rest of you, hopefully, once the pandemic subsides, we'd be happy to welcome you to show you the amazing plant at Big River Steel. That's basically the story of Big River. I think what we're going to do now is switch to a Q&A session and start with some of the questions that have already been coming in during this process here. And I'm going to ask Dan and Mike, and I'm going to thank my colleague Alex for his translation. He'll continue to translate. So again, if you're following along in Russian, feel free to use the interpretation button. We have a number of questions that have come in here. We've also gotten some questions that have been emailed to us. Let's start with some of the ones that have come in here. We've got some of these questions have already been covered by Dan, but perhaps we can have you guys repeat it. So there's questions about the length of the process. How long does the EB-5 visa take? What is the fastest option? And a related question, which is, I am already in the U.S. on an L1 visa. Could my spouse on L2? How does it work? If she's if we want to do EB-5. So perhaps you can talk a little bit about options for people who are already in the United States and how long the process might take.
Yeah. Mike, do you want to, or what do you want to do?
Sure. Yeah. Sure. I'll do it in English and then in Russian, if you don't mind, Sebastian. Okay.
Yeah, I think that sounds great.
Okay. So the first question was about kind of the timeline, right? So in terms of the timeline, we're looking at, probably a month or two to prepare everything, to assemble all the documentation of source of funds. And then once we lodge the petition with the Immigration Service, this is an average. So, right now they're taking a little bit longer. Sometimes they're taking a little less time, but probably at least 1.5 to 3 years is a good guess. It fluctuates. Like I said, right now it's a bit longer than that. We expect those numbers to go down because the number of investors has also kind of tapered off a little bit. There was a big fluctuation late last year as the investment, right before the investment amounts went up. In terms of, what happens once that I-526 petition is approved, it gets pushed to the State Department, and it takes another few months to collect all the documents that you'll need, which include civil documents like marriage certificates, birth certificates, and then ultimately, it will get scheduled for an interview at the U.S. Embassy, typically shortly thereafter. Once you get the immigrant visa, it'll be valid for 6 months, and you can travel to the U.S. So at the very minimum, this is a process that does take a couple of years, but it's not to say that other immigration processes currently in the United States also don't take at least a few years of time. To answer the question with respect to the L2, the L2 spouse could serve as an investor for purposes of immigration, of the immigration process. And basically what you would be doing is, once their 526 petition is approved, as opposed to going the consular route, you could file what's called an adjustment of status application in the United States, essentially to change, from L1 or L2 to a permanent resident. And at that point, the L1 spouse could be included with the L2 acting as the principal investor. Probably, depending on where they live, might take another year or slightly more to actually get to an interview, which would be the final point, and get the temporary kind of green card, the conditional green card. Okay, so both processes takes a couple of years, but again, that's not uncommon in this space with respect to immigration. And the major benefit of EB-5 is, of course, that you don't need an employer to sponsor you throughout this process, right? So yeah, сейчас вопрос был. Actually, Sebastian, can I just ask a question? Sure. When does Pavel translate the question on the Russian channel, or should I translate the question also?
No, I think it'd be better if you do. It's
okay.
You're going to be a little smoother and more knowledgeable.
So вопрос о том, сколько времени занимает этот весь процесс. И как бы ответ, что это занимает пару лет. И мы с вами обсуждали, что сначала нам нужно как бы подготовить всю петицию. Это занимает обычно от месяца до 2. Мы потом подаем эту петицию с иммиграционной службы. Иммиграционная служба обычно рассматривает эту петицию от 18 до 36 месяцев. Сейчас они чуть-чуть подольше. Мы ожидаем, что в конце года они будут опять чуть-чуть побыстрее работать, просто потому что многие подали петиции в конце прошлого года, когда как бы сколько это все стоит, стало повыше. После того, как иммиграционная служба рассматривает эту петицию, она потом все документы посылает в Госдепартамент, State Department. Госдепартамент потом начинает запрос документов. Обычные документы, которые они просят, например, свидетельство брака, свидетельство развода, свидетельство рождения и прочее. Они потом пару месяцев это все рассматривают и посылают эту петицию в посольство. Если вы в России, например, это будет в Москве, если в другой стране, это будет как бы в посольстве в вашей стране. Посольство потом вас приглашает на собеседование. После того, как они все рассматривают, они вам печатают иммиграционную визу, которая вам позволяет за 6 месяцев мигрировать в США. Okay? Этот весь процесс занимает пару лет. Как бы минимум. Мы надеемся, что это все будет быстрее, и как бы иммиграционная служба начала рассматривать петиции по-другому, так что если вы из страны, например, как Россия, где есть иммиграционные визы, где их достаточно, они, может быть, будут рассматривать быстрее, потому что они теперь рассматривают сначала петиции, где есть иммиграционные визы. Okay? Все процессы, чтобы получить грин-карту в США, они занимают пару лет. Так что это как бы разница между EB-5 и этими другими процессами, это что другие процессы почти что все, для них нужен работодатель. Для EB-5 не нужен работодатель, вы как бы можете инвестировать деньги сами, и вы как бы контролируете этот процесс. Был также вопрос, если человек сейчас на неиммиграционной визе L1, и у них есть супруга, на которой на L2, супруга может как бы пройти этот процесс в США, может быть инвестором. И ответ это, что да, супруга может как L2 быть инвестором, и как бы разница это после того, как иммиграционная служба усвоит I-526, I-526 петицию, они потом человек, который на L2 визе, на L2, он может подать петицию, чтобы изменить статус, когда они уже в США. Это займет минимум, наверное, еще год, и они пройдут собеседование не в посольстве, а с иммиграционной службой. Иммиграционная служба потом усвоит и также напечатает эту грин-карту. Так что, опять, этот процесс занимает пару лет, но это не значит, что другие процессы работают намного быстрее. Okay, Sebastian, I'm done. And one thing I just wanted to mention that I forgot on the English side, and I mentioned on the Russian side, was the Immigration Service, we noted this in the presentation, has changed the way that it's reviewing petitions. So they're reviewing them, they used to essentially review them first in, first out, and now they're reviewing based on visa availability. And that benefits people from Russia and other countries of the former Soviet Union, because immigrant visas for those countries are available. And hopefully that means that the Immigration Service will start looking at them a little bit faster.
Great. Okay, I have a question here that relates to what if the project I chose goes bankrupt? Do I lose my money and my green card? And what has been the impact of COVID on Big River Steel? So you can hear me, right, guys?
Yep.
Pablo, everybody? Okay. So two parts to that question. The first of all is, bankruptcy, should a project go bankrupt, does not necessarily impact your green card process. The green card process relates to whether or not the jobs were created. As long as those jobs were in fact created and verified by an independent economist, the fact that the project perhaps a number of years later goes bankrupt does not necessarily mean that you're going to lose your green card. The green card relates to the job. So you might very well get to keep the green card, but not get your money back, or perhaps not get all of your money back. Conversely, it's possible that the other thing happens, where the project does perfectly fine, they have plenty of money to pay you back, but in the process of the creating the project, they overestimated the number of jobs they were going to create, and they didn't end up creating enough jobs. So yes, you get your money back, but no, you do not get your green card, or you don't get to keep your green card. As relates to Big River Steel, those two problems have already been removed, as mentioned. So you have a situation here where all the jobs have already not just been created, but they've actually been verified by an independent economist called Baker Tilly. That verification letter already exists. Happy to share that with anyone who's interested in seeing it and reviewing it. So already today, that sufficient jobs were created. You don't have to worry. The jobs don't have to stay forever. In fact, most construction jobs are by nature temporary. So it's not a question of keeping these jobs forever. It's a question of creating the jobs for a period of time. And that's been confirmed. Now, the second part of it is how has COVID affected Big River? Big River is very fortunate in its location. It is located in a very rural area. Not a lot of people. It's in the northeast corner of Arkansas on the Mississippi River. They have had no problems with COVID in that area. The project itself has not had any work slowdowns or work stoppages. There have been no construction bans in that region. That's something that a lot of the big cities have seen, where because of COVID, projects have had to stop construction. None of that has happened in Big River. So not only has phase 2 continued and is on schedule, in fact, ahead of schedule, but also Big River itself is a operating company that continues to create cash flow. And obviously the hospitality sector, hotel projects, office projects, condo projects have been hit very hard by COVID. Big River is lucky. They have a very diverse set of buyers that continue to need to buy high-grade steel. The car industry is continuing to do well. In fact, because people are moving out of the city, car sales are up. So steel is actually doing fine, and a particular company like Big River. So the net story here is that COVID has not had a negative effect on Big River Steel, neither on the phase 2 construction, nor on the company as a whole, and that's a big advantage. I am going to switch to the next question. Let's see here. Where do we have the next question? Okay, we have a question saying, hold on. U.S. Steel announced the strategic plan to acquire Big River. What will happen to Big River EB-5 investor if Big River is taken over? Very simple question. No negative impact on EB-5 investors. EB-5 investors are investing through a private equity vehicle called Pine State Infrastructure Fund. I'll spend just a moment explaining this. The law requires that the EB-5 investor is an equity investor, but most projects use a so-called loan model. And the way it works is that typically the regional center will put together a pooled vehicle where they collect all the money into one vehicle, and that one vehicle, that one fund, will then make a loan to the project. That's the structure that also we have used. So Pine State Infrastructure Fund is what the investor will invest in as a limited partner, and then that fund is lending money to Big River Steel. If Big River Steel ownership changes, so if U.S. Steel ultimately ends up buying a majority of Big River Steel, it does not affect their obligations to its various lenders. We are one of their lenders, and all those lenders will continue to have the same relationship with Big River Steel, no matter who is the ultimate owner of Big River. If anything, we view this as a very positive sign that a company like U.S. Steel thinks highly of Big River Steel and would like to, grow its stake in Big River Steel. So that's a positive, and it would not affect the EB-5 investor negatively in any way. Next question here. What if I want to switch from green card to citizenship? So I guess this is a question for Mike and Dan. How does that process work?
Mike, you want to? We can't hear you.
Sorry, I was on mute. I apologize. So sure. So let's talk about that process. So once you've had your green card, including the 2 years that you have your EB-5 green card as a conditional green card, once you've had it for a total of 5 years, you're eligible to apply for naturalization, for citizenship. So within 90 days of the 5-year anniversary, you can file an application with the Immigration Service. That application is one where they will ask you to, to show that you've met a couple of requirements. One, of course, you don't have any serious kind of criminal issues. 2, that you've paid your taxes in the United States for the last kind of 5 years. And then 3 would be kind of that you've continuously resided in the United States, during the 5-year period, having spent at least 2.5 out of the last 5 years physically present in the country, right? So that application is a lot more straightforward than the 526 petition, for example, that you would be filing. It's a lot less document heavy, and you would be lodging that with the Immigration Service. And ultimately, let's say in a year after you lodge it, you would be invited for an interview at the local field office of the Immigration Service. That would review the application. They would go through a fairly straightforward citizenship exam. It's not, it's not meant to be a challenging one. Generally, I say that my grandfather was 72 years old, spoke English very poorly, had 4 heart attacks and a stroke, and was an amputee, and he still passed. So I'm confident that everybody here can as well. So that's kind of the process in a nutshell. Now, in terms of, let me switch to Russian now. So вопрос был о том, как подать на гражданство после того, как у вас эта грин-карта была 5 лет, правильно? И эти 5 лет, они считаются с того момента, когда вы получили эту грин-карту с условиями, и вы это время как бы считаете. И чтобы подать на гражданство, вы должны как бы доказать, что вы последние 5 лет платили налоги, что вы с 5 лет провели минимум 2,5 из 5 как бы лет в США, что вы продолжали как бы иметь намерение жить в США, и что у вас не был, и также, что вы платили как бы налоги в это время. Эта петиция подается с иммиграционной службой, они просят биографическую информацию, петиция опять подается с иммиграционной служба потом вызывает вас на собеседование, это занимает где-то год, потом они проводят во время этого собеседования, они спрашивают биографические вопросы, и также они проводят очень простой как бы экзамен, и они там задают вопросы о истории и истории США. Моему деду было за 70 лет, у него был диабет, 4 инфаркта, инсульт, и ноги не было, и он как бы стал гражданином США и прошел этот экзамен. Так что я как бы 100% уверен, что все, которые сейчас слушают, также могут этот процесс закончить успешно. Okay, Sebastian, back to you.
Great, Mike. Thank you. I have the next question here, I think, is probably specific to us. How long is the investment period, and what if other investors come from China? Do I have to stay invested for 14 years? Very good question, by the way, and simple answer. Every investor is viewed separately. So every investor invests in their own tranche. So if certain investors have to stay invested for longer because their immigration process is not yet complete, whether it's because of retrogression, such as exists for Chinese investors, or simply their petition has not been adjudicated yet, that does not affect the rest of the investors. Our core investment period is 5 years. This is a 5-year investment period. If your immigration process is complete after 5 years, great, and you get your money back at the end of the 5th year. There are 3 potential 1-year extensions. So if your immigration process is not complete after 5 years, you would be rolled forward and you could stay in for another year. And if you need another year, you can have a 7th year, and you could have as many as 8 years, but only if you need it. So certain investors will potentially need that. Other investors may not. So you are not affected by the other investors' needs. You'll get your money back when after the 5th year, as soon as your immigration process is complete. Next question. Okay, hold on. We have a question here I think is for Dan, maybe. Would it not be better to wait for the elections and long-promised immigration reforms before investing in Big River? Is there any deadline?
Yeah, sure. So there, in my view, there's not. In other words, the EB-5 regulatory changes did what I think it took care of a lot of what Congress wanted to take care of, right? At a regulatory level instead of legislative. So they got the investment amount up. They redefined the targeted employment area. Those are the 2 big goals. I don't see that there's going to be some change that's favorable for investors following the election, whether the president wins or loses. So that's the first piece to it. And what was the second piece, Sebastian? It was sorry. You're on mute.
Sorry. I think it was just, whether waiting for reforms that have been long promised makes sense, but I think they're not necessarily tied to the election outcome.
Yeah, exactly right. So that's on the EB-5 reform piece, which again has kind of been satisfied. And then more broadly, immigration reform, you can't wait for that. It's an easy one that's been supposed to be coming for a decade now. So the strategy of waiting for that, no, is really the blunt answer to that. Now, maybe if someone's out of status in the United States and can't leave or can't adjust because they violated their visa, then that's a different answer. But if otherwise it's fine from an immigration standpoint, waiting for reform, I would say no. I don't see value in waiting for that.
Okay, Mike, do you want to take a quick
Sure.
crack at
So, вопрос был, если есть смысл как бы подождать до выборов, чтобы посмотреть, если изменится EB-5 программа, или если Конгресс американский реформирует законодательство с миграционной точки зрения. И ответ, что нет, нету особого смысла, потому что выборы как бы не будут влиять на законодательство с точки зрения, что мы уже много лет ждем, чтобы Конгресс что-то реформировал, и это как бы смысл ждать еще как бы нету, потому что мы не видим какие-то изменения в будущем, и как бы мы не думаем, что выборы будут, от выборов будет какие-то изменения, те изменения, которые Конгресс не может как бы сделать. Okay, Sebastian, back to you.
Okay, I have two more questions here, both quite simple. The first one is, with the green card, do I have to live in the same area as the project, and how many days per year do I have to spend in the US? The short answer on the first question is no, you do not have to live in the same area. The nice thing about the green card is it's completely flexible. You can live anywhere in the United States. And the nice thing about the EB-5 program is if you're using the regional center structure, not only do you not have to live in the state where the project is, but you don't have to know anything about the project. You are a passive investor, and you neither have to be operationally involved in the project, nor do you have to visit the project or anything like that. Dan and Mike, maybe you want to talk about how many days per year do I have to spend in the United States?
Yeah, sure. I'll do it. Basically, when you have a green card, the expectation is that the U.S. is your home. So you start with that baseline of, well, what does home mean? The simple answer is more time here than out. But that's not a hard and fast rule. So we would want to sit with you on your facts and understand what the goals are, and then come up with a strategy for it. But there's not really a bright line answer to your question. I think that the safe answer, or the easy answer, just for a threshold, would be like half the year, but that's not set in stone. And there's a lot of flexibility within that to push that back, to spend more than half out if you're strategic in how much time you travel, the frequency and duration. So not a specific answer to that question, but the easy one is you should think about a green card as living in the United States. And then you have variations from that, and we could be pretty creative in pushing that start date back pretty significantly through different filings and different approaches to preserve and push out your green card status while you're temporarily outside the United States. So it's really a fact-specific question. We want to sit with you to understand what your goals are and then map a strategy around that. But usually if it's not spending like a week in the United States a year, we can try to make it happen and over a few years. At some point, you're gonna have to move here, but we can be pretty flexible within that. So not really helpful, I think, but if you give us your facts, we can talk about it and come up with a strategy.
Okay. So вопрос был, сколько времени нужно проводить в США, когда вы получаете грин-карту? И как бы самый простой ответ – это что вы должны проводить большинство времени в США, потому что когда вы подаете и получаете эту грин-карту, как бы государство смотрит на это, как будто у вас есть намерение здесь жить и здесь постоянно жить. Как бы. Но также есть варианты, где вы можете проводить довольно долго за границей и сохранить эту грин-карту. Okay? Обычно мы говорим, что если вы, по крайней мере, полгода проводите, это как бы самый простой как бы путь. Но есть опять варианты, где если вы проводите больше, чем полгода, если вы часто езжаете в страну, если мы подаем на разные там документы и как бы есть на это ответы, вы можете сохранить эту грин-карту. Так что это все зависит от как бы от того, что вы хотите, и мы как бы с вами работаем, чтобы это достичь. Back to you, Sebastian.
All right, thanks, Mike. Okay, I think that's all the Q&A we have. We appreciate everybody logging on today. We hope you had found it informative and helpful. We welcome you to reach out to us if you have further questions, if your questions were not answered, or if you have some questions you'd like to discuss more in private. We will be happy to send you contact information to both ourselves as well as the Fragomen team, and look forward to staying in touch. And if anyone wants either of the slideshows or the decks, we'd be happy to share those as well. So please reach out to us and let us know. And we look forward to staying in touch, and wish you a very nice day. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Alex. And thank you to all our audience members.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sebastian.
Thank you all.